Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we finally get to talk about Ryzen 5. And Ryzen 5 is the cheaper variants of the Ryzen lineup. We start off with a 4-core, but we do get a 6-core thrown in there as well. They've kind of nailed the 4s and the 6s all under the 5 nomenclature. Now, I do need to say right at the very beginning of this video, I am going to be giving you a lot of information. And because we're trying to review 3 CPUs at once. But we've also, when you consider it, normally when you review a CPU, there is also some competition out there that we need to talk about. So if we've got 3 CPUs, we also need to consider 3 lots of competition. Although we're only going to have one graph, because they're all in that graph, and there's going to be a lot of stuff for you to take in and be able to get in there and pick in and out and do all of that with. But the other thing that we kind of need to cover, and I think it's about time that we do cover it, is what CPU may be right for you. And that doesn't mean that I may be telling you that you might need to go red. I'm going to be very kind of honest with you, and we're going to talk about a lot about AMD and Intel and which one might be right for you. And the reason why I'm going to do that is I've had enough of this whole fanboy BS. And we need to just realise that we're all a part of a really big family and we all play the same games. It's not like this console, you know, PC console BS. Do you know what I mean? We're all a part of the PC master race. That's it at the end of the day. And it doesn't matter if you buy Intel and it doesn't matter if you buy AMD. Like I said, we're all playing the same games. So maybe we should just understand that one processor may be good for one person, but it might not be right for the next one. And we don't need to tell anyone that they've particularly got it wrong. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and give you guys the information that you need to make the decision for yourself. Because I have seen a lot of people going, oh no, you just need to buy this. And they're not talking to one person, they're talking to their entire audience. And I don't think that's been the right way to go about it. And to be honest with you, with some of them, and I've only seen clips because I try not to watch other people's videos, otherwise this happens, but I get a lot more vocal about it. I think it kind of stinks a bit, and what we do need to realise is across the board there may be a different processor for everyone. So yeah, essentially we're going to get into it now because they've released quite a few. Now I've got the 1400, the 1500X and the 1600X. Now the 1400 is the cheapest one in the range for Ryzen 5. You get 4 cores and you get 8 threads, and it comes in at they're saying $169, but with the way that it went with the Ryzen 7s, those were directly translating into pounds. Now I know a lot of people have been getting funny about that because of exchange rates and why are we paying the same as the dollar prices. Well, I'm sorry everyone in Blighty, the one thing that you need to remember is you do end up paying VAT on the top of any of those dollar prices, and that's just the way it works. So if they do directly go from dollars into pounds, at this present moment in time, that's actually probably been weighted in your favour because of that extra 20% VAT that's going to be getting nailed in on the top. So anyway, so 169 quid, 4 cores, 8 threads. 4 cores and 8 threads, if you were to translate that into the Intel range, would be the 7700K, which is going to be, I think they're around 350 or 360 quid. So when you say that out loud, it sounds pretty good. And the only real kind of falling point down with the AMDs, because they are pretty similar clock for clock, it's just the fact that these do run at a much lower clock speed. But we're going to get into the thick of this. Because if you were to compare price, then around this sort of price bracket, you can get some of the lower end i5s, which are just 4 cores. But if you want to overclock and play, because this is a critical thing about the lower end of the AMD market, they are unlocked and they're more kind of budget orientated, enthusiast friendly, because you have got the overclocking ability on it. Is the other thing to kind of consider about is you do get more cores and then you get to play as well. And depending on the motherboard that you buy, because you do need to get the right Intel motherboard, some of those, even if you were to spend more money, you end up getting a non-overclocking board, or some of the memory on the boards are capped at 2400 megahertz. So there's lots of kind of little ins and outs and, you know, trade-offs. So there is a really good positive thing about this being only 100, well, I say only 170, but £170. If you put it on a B350 board, then you're not only going to get the memory ability being able to go up, because all of the CPUs that we've been testing, although it's kind of it going into the testing and the conclusion and the overclocking and stuff, all going up to at least, well, 2933 megahertz. So you get more, and we'll break them down as well, because I've got lots of information to talk to you about it. But then you get that overclocking as well. So you have a lot of options. And the other thing is AMD are going to be supporting the AM4 socket for quite a while. So even if you were to buy the Ryzen 5 1400 at 169 now, and then in 6 months' time you get a bonus, and you think to yourself, well, I want to upgrade, you would be able to, and just swap it straight in as well. You might even in a year's time want to put the 1800X in, or if we get a Ryzen 2, you're going to be able to do that, because the socket's going to have a lot more options for you there. The fact that you can go from, or you will be able to go from later on, an APU, and then if you wanted to upgrade, then go straight up to an 8-core 16-thread processor on the same motherboard, is actually a bit nuts. And it's also another really good kind of like upgradability, longevity, all of that sort of thing, talking point. But anyway, base clock 3.2 gigahertz. It's then got a boost clock speed of 3.4 gigahertz as well. So it's a fairly good CPU, is a fairly good clock number. It's not, you know, monstrous or anything like that. But when we did give it a bit of a tickle, as in with the overclock and stuff, we managed to get it up to 3.8 gigahertz at 1.4 volts. Now, one of the things that you do need to kind of keep in mind at 1.4 volts is it does get a bit toasty. But talking about toasty, if you buy the Ryzen 5 1400 and you get it and it's like Bosch, do you know what I mean? Like which is the box of the 1400? It's actually the bigger one, because it comes with a cooler. So the cooler that you get is the Wraith Stealth, and it's this one. This is the one that you're going to get in the box. Now, it's not massive, do you know what I mean? It's just, it looks a bit, the way that the base are, essentially it's like extruded aluminium, and then you've got these studs around the outside which screw into your back plate. There's no copper core or anything on this one. You've got quite a deep bladed fan, in that it's a kind of a static pressure based fan. There's no RGB or any lights or anything on it, but it comes in the box. And if you run your CPU at stock, we actually tested the cooler for you as well. So the with that cooler, which only comes with a 1400, maxing out about 56 degrees. 56 degrees, and what something else that we did notice is that was running at 1.175 volts as a maximum. Always remember you can overclock if you want to save yourself some time. At full load, it wasn't the quietest thing in the world, but it certainly wasn't a tornado going on underneath as well. And at 56 degrees, you've got I wouldn't say it's an overclocking cooler by any stretch of the imagination. Then when we move up to the 1500X, 4 cores, 8 threads again, £189. So you're looking at £20 more. For that £20 more, your boost clock goes up from 3.2 gigahertz and then goes up to 3.5 gigahertz. The boost goes from 3.4 with the 1400, then that notches its way up to 3.7 gigahertz. With that, the cooler that you get is the Wraith Spire. Now this has got the same fan on the top, but what you can see is it's a lot bigger. So you can see the difference between the two if I try and line them up. One's a lot thinner than the other one. But the other difference is when we talk about this one, not only is it bigger, but it has a copper core in the middle as well. So this does help dissipate the heat, because obviously your CPU is going to be touching the copper bit, and this does help get the heat into the cooler that little bit easier. But you then got more of the cooler as well for fins, but then the same fan on the top. Again, this doesn't have RGB. People may have seen this cooler with an RGB ring around the outside, but it's the one that came with the 1700 vanilla CPU. The other one, the square one, the very, very top end one, which is the one that we've got here at the moment, is the Wraith Max, and this was available on limited numbers of the 1800Xs, because really at that end of the kind of market, you should be getting a aftermarket cooler. Now, there's been a lot of talk about temperatures and stuff, and there was a 20-degree offset on some of the early ones. We're in a kind of weird tipping point now where some of the programs are showing the offset, some are not. AMD have been working around it with the Ryzen Master as well. But essentially it's the 95-watt coolers and above. So the 1500X, which is the 3.5, 3.7 4-core, doesn't have the 20-degree offset. But the 1600X, which is this 6-core, 12-thread one, that one does have the 20-degree offset. And the thing that AMD is saying is they're saying it's... So if you think about it, everything has been kind of Intel for such a long time. They were worried about people using Intel fan profiles, in that the motherboards would have been spinning the fans up to a level that we would have been used to with Intel. So for argument's sake, with some of the Intel processors, you know, are around kind of the 70 to 75 degrees mark, that would be when the fans would go to 100%. But that was just the way that they were going, and then that was a socket temp. But that was actually a bit warmer, too warm for these, because these don't really like going above 70 very much, if you've not got the offset, by the way. I'm talking about kind of a normal, non-tweaked version of the scores. So they added that in, just that they span up a little bit more, and it meant that they could cool properly at the top end. But the problem was, when they were saying that, was AMD motherboard. You can't put an Intel processor on it. Surely you can talk to the motherboard manufacturers and get them to make the fan profile slightly better without ruining the end user usage on your CPUs by adding 20 degrees onto the temperatures, which meant that you only needed to move your mouse and it was running at 100% fan speeds. It was a bit backwards. So I don't know what they were thinking there. I don't think we've had the 100% honest answer about it yet. Other than the fact, I did notice that if you were overclocking, sometimes you could stabilise your overclock with 100% fans. And by that, I think they are incredibly temperature sensitive, and we've not really got to the bottom of it yet. Could even still be something to do with the BIOS and kind of a live beta test going on with everyone that's bought them so far, because it does kind of feel that way a little bit. So I'm not 100% sure what was going on with the offsets with that. But anyway, slightly kind of going off topic a little bit. So with the Ryzen 5 1600X, 6 threads, 12 cores, base clock 3.6 gigahertz, boost speed 4 gigahertz, which is hella healthy. With that one, it doesn't come with a cooler because it's got that offset, and they're kind of trying to push you down the avenue to go and buy your aftermarket ones. But the thing is I have to kind of say, excuse me, that I don't see, if you can send this cooler out with the 1800X, I think there should have been an option for people, if they'd wanted to have done, to have been able to have got the Wraith Max with the 1600X, the 1700, the 1700X. Anyway, so really I think we've actually got to the point where, you know, maybe they should sell it separately, because it's actually not a bad cooler by any stretch of the imagination. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to be amazing, and you're not going to be able to break records with overclocking or anything like that. But if you're just looking for a processor that you can kind of nail in, manually set your CPU volts, because this is something that we need to be making pretty clear with these, and it's a great way to drop your temperatures. I don't see why you wouldn't want to buy that, because I reckon they could pump that out for around £30–35, and for the kind of the coolers around that price bracket, I actually think it looks pretty good as well. You've got the RGB side of it on it. The only problem is that the RGB cable on it is massive, and I do mean huge. So it would be a really nice thing if AMD could have that massive one. Yeah, for those people that need to drop it down to the bottom of the board. But remember, if you do get it, put the cable round the back of your motherboard, not straight down the front, because we do like to watch the way things look. But I think it would have been nice if they had a shorter one as well, because there are a lot of the newer boards, B350s and the X370 boards, that have either a connection down by what we would call where our rear fan header would be, so the rear case fan header, or up at the top. So it would have been nice if they had a cable that kind of catered for that rather than the huge 60 centimetre one that was in there, and it just made it a bit of a pain to hide, because you then have to put the cable round the back of the motherboard, do the big loop to get rid of the extra, and then poke it back in again. So there's a hint, because they probably won't change it, because let's face it, they're not going to listen to me. Anyway, so they're the 3 processors. We've got a 6-core, 12-thread, and we've got 2 4-cores, and with 8 threads. But they obviously come in at different prices. The 612 is 249, the 1500X with 4 8 is 189, and then the 1400 4 8 is 169. So there's a fair old range of prices there. The problem is when we go into those prices is the 6-core 8-thread kind of falls into processors that would have been twice the price, because for argument's sake, stuff like the Intel low-end 6-core 12-thread ones, they're all sort of 450, 500 quid. And then you go into the 4-core 8-thread ones, so that's only the 1700K, and they're 350. So you could say they're half the price. But what we're going to do when we talk about performance is we're going to compare them by performance numbers rather than the spec sheet, because I think that's kind of slightly more, fair. Now, when it comes to these, AMD did want us to test on the B350 boards, and they were harping on about BIOS optimizations, which is kind of fair. But the problem is the board that they sent us actually arrived late, and we'd had the CPUs first, and then the board actually arrived the day that we'd finished all of the testing. So what we ended up doing is we ended up using our Asus X370 motherboard. So we used that, but the good thing about using that is it meant that we tested all of the CPUs on it. So all of the 1800X, 1700X, 1700, they were tested on this board as well. So we can directly compare all of the results. Now, they were talking about Ryzen 5 optimizations in the BIOS. So I just went to Asus, got a BIOS, got that sorted, got it all on there. So it was all lovely bubbly. So I do have an Asus B350 Prime that I'll probably end up reviewing as an individual product later on, which is what they wanted us to test these CPUs on. But like I said, the board just arrived too late. And if I'm totally honest, the board arrived Friday after we'd finished all of the testing, and the sun's been out all weekend. So I went out in it because I wasn't going to just redo it because it arrived so late. And to be honest with you, I know the board and the performance, we've tested B350 and X370. There is no real difference there apart from price. So it doesn't matter which one of the CPUs you drop into it. The only real difference is an extra M.2 slot and the ability to run SLI. So it doesn't particularly matter. So the fact that we've kept the test rig exactly the same actually made things quite fair to drop them in the graphs together. So memory, we've got an awful lot of it that we've been testing and putting through. Something else to talk about with memory is they are releasing this Aegis code quite a bit, and every time there's new Aegis code, there has been changes with the BIOS where it does get a bit technical, but at the end of the day, every time they do that, the motherboard manufacturers are then running around like headless chickens, because it's almost like wiping the slate clean with the BIOS, and they're kind of having to start again and trying to get stuff done. So the best thing that I can say is if you've bought a Ryzen system and you're having problems with your memory, see if it will run at stock. Don't try turning on the XMP, AXMP, DOCP. See if it will run at stock, because if it boots at 2300, you're okay. If it's then not booting when you're trying to enable XMP or DOCP, just clear the BIOS and go back to 2133 again. Then try doing it manually. But what I would say is try doing it manually and going from 2400, 2666 and going upwards that way. Don't just go straight in at 2933 or 3200 megahertz and then worry. If it runs on one of the lower speeds, you slowly start to work it up. If you get to 2933, and this is, bearing in mind, if we're talking about 2933 or 3200 megahertz, I'm talking to you like you've bought kits that fast, not to overclock beyond. So if you've bought kits that quick and you get up to 2933 or 3200 megahertz and it's not posting, the SoC volts in the BIOS can be an area that if you try turning them up a little bit might help you. One thing I have to stress though is don't just stick the top value in and then hope it will work, because adding those volts in will increase your temperatures. So if you get up to, say for argument's sake, 2933 posts, but trying to go to 3200 doesn't post, what I would try and do is go to your SoC volts, put 1.1 volts in manually, try then. 1.15 in, try then. Do not go above 1.2. Go to 1.2. If it doesn't post after that point, then adding extra volts in won't get you anywhere. It's just not happy with that speed yet. Could be your BIOS, could be the memory. But if you've already had 2933 running, go back to 2933 and wait. Keep updating your BIOS and see if and when you can go up that little extra bit. It's just something with this being kind of an active development process with AMD at the moment. So it's just going to be something for you to keep an eye on. Now, when it comes to setting it up manually, all you really need to do is select the speed, go into the memory timing section, and if you have a look on the side of your memory stick before you fit it, there'll be some numbers. It will be, for argument's sake, 16, 16, 16, 32 for argument's sake, and you can see where to put those in the BIOS, because you'll see the similar numbers going down in the BIOS, and you just plumb those in. Then the only other thing to do is your voltage, find the memory voltage in the BIOS as well. Again, it's written on the side of your memory stick, put it in, hit F10, save. But the one thing I would do is when it says about the memory speed, so 2133, 2666, start on the lower one, go into Windows, make sure it's all right, go back into the BIOS. It is a bit of a faff, but this is just, you've been spoilt for years with stuff being easy and clickable. This is a brand new platform, so it is something for people to play with now. If you just want it easy, don't touch the BIOS, just get it started, forget about it, and then when stuff settles down, let one of your mates that actually knows and likes to play come around one night, buy pizza, buy beer, sit there, watch him, learn a bit about it. You might even find that you end up getting the bug. And then again, you might find that you don't. The other thing is you might even find if you're having trouble setting your memory up and stuff like that, one of your girlfriends might be able to come around and do a better job. Ooh, that's a hot topic, Tom. Anyway, so the processors, we're going to talk about results and stuff in the graphs at the moment. Like I said, I'm trying to bombard you with information at the moment so that you can actually get the whole picture about what's going on. So overclocking, quite simple. The base one, which was 170 quid, this one did 3.8 gigahertz, but in the memory we couldn't get above 2933. For love nor money, it would not go above, even though we know our test system is more than capable. What we also ended up doing was, just to make sure, we ended up dropping it in the Crosshair 6. And this isn't in the results or anything like that, but we put it in the Crosshair 6 because we know with the Crosshair 6 we've had this running at 333 megahertz memory, and you've got the base clock that you can play with. There's loads of other things, and again we couldn't get the processor memory speed to go above 2933, so we do just think that with this one it's actually quite well binned. When you go to the 6 and the 4 core above, so the X's, they actually both did 4 gigahertz at 1.4 volts with 3200 megahertz memory. On the X370 Prime, 3200 megahertz memory is actually the top memory divider that you can select. So the fact that the BIOS has matured so much now, you can just select that. And admittedly, it's memory specific and all of that sort of stuff. So don't just think that you can go and buy 3200 megahertz memory or any memory kit and it works. It might not work that way, but we know with the right memory kit, this board is capable of 3200 megahertz memory. Now, I know you're asking now, which 3200 megahertz kits? Well, we have a G-Skill Trident Z kit. It's the non-RGB one, although I believe the RGB one does work. And we've also been running Corsair LPX memory, and we've been able to get those done fine. One of the weird things is DICP works on the Crosshair 6, but with the X370 Prime to do 3200 megahertz, we were having to set both kits up manually. So the weird thing is with stuff like this, is it is so different. These are the same brands and they're different. Now it's different across the whole range. We've had some issues with all of the brands, but in the same thing, some of them get certain bits wrong, and then another one will get something else right. So there's lots of toing and froing at the moment. But one of the things I can't stress enough is if you've bought Ryzen and just sent it back, you've kind of given up too soon. And it probably would have been better for you to have been slightly more patient and waited around. Either that, or you've been a bit hasty with your memory choice. Because at the moment, that's really the only issue that I've seen. Everything that people are moaning about at the moment can and will be fixed. All brands. Doesn't matter what the problem is. It will get sorted. Excuse me. It's just a case of as and when. And with all this Gears code and stuff getting changed, their BIOS devs at the moment are pulling their hair out. So give them a bit of time. If they've not sorted it in a little bit of a while, I'll start moaning. Don't you worry about it. And I will kick up a stink and we'll see how quickly we can get the BIOS stuff fixed. Because if I can get BIOS out of them, then I just share it with you guys anyway. Because then once I've shared it with you guys, they then work twice as hard to get the proper version rolled out for you rather than the half-finished version that they'll give to me. Sorry, needed a water break, was getting a bit dry, I'd been talking too much. So we're on to graphs. Now the most important thing here is you can go and have a look on the OC3D website. If you go and have a look on the OC3D website, there's a lot more tests, loads more stuff going on, a little bit more chit-chatty, sort of like getting, you know, having a look at things. So if you're interested, go there, have a look, and see what you think. It's a really good place for if you're actually thinking about buying this sort of thing and you're looking to cross-reference between the CPUs, because there are a lot of CPUs in here. And the good thing about there being a lot of CPUs in here is we obviously don't retest for every review, but especially the Ryzen stuff, the Ryzen results are all quite recent, and then all the other Intel stuff in there, it just goes to show you how many of these flipping reviews and how many days testing I lose a year trying to get these graphs built up. Now we're going to start with gaming, because gaming is a hot topic. Now the graph that we've got here is aligned by the Gears of War CPU tab, which is why you can kind of see it going out at the sides. But the ones to take note of are the short block in the middle. And this is the reason why we've kind of aligned them in this way, is if you look really carefully, there isn't a huge amount of difference once you, if we're talking about games. Now, it's quite an interesting graph because you've got the 7700K, the 7600K, and even an i5 6500 at the top. So that's 4-core, no hyperthreading, 4-core, no hyperthreading, 4-core hyperthreading. Now, if you look at those, all of those results are fairly similar. The only difference is the CPU result. So the CPU result on the Gears of War, that's going to be clock speed based, because the 7700K, even at stock, will have been doing 4.5 gigahertz. So we can see clearly there that really that's where it's going to come from. It doesn't really care about the hyperthreading that much, to be fair. If we'd have overclocked the 7600K, it would have been near enough the same score as that there. So they are basically using about 4 cores, basically. Right, but the thing that I want to draw your attention to is if we were to go from the 1600X overclock, which I know we're going in with the overclock, but if you look at that result, there's only like 4 or 5 frames between that and the top of the graph. So you've got 73.6 versus 78.7. So we'll say 4 or 5 frames between those. Now, one of the things that you do need to remember is, yes, we are talking about a big range of Intel processors at the top. So there may only be like 4 or 5 frames between that baby i5 and even the 7700K. So if we take the onus away from AMD, we don't care about AMD at this present moment in time, we're just going to look at the top 3. If you look at the top 3, they're all really, really close. So if they're all really, really close, why are we arguing so much about the AMD ones? Because if the Intel ones, the difference there could be like a £200 difference. If the difference there is £200, and yet there's not, much to go between them, unless you go on the games that have got very, very specific benchmarks or very, very CPU bound, Surely, if we're not going to pick between those two, or if we are going to pick between those two and it's all about price, surely then that opens up us to be able to talk about the AMD side of things. So if we, like I said, the 1600X overclock, yeah, okay, you are going to need to overclock it to get the most out of it. But if we say, let's go the 1600X vanilla, 75.7 for Rise of the Tomb Raider. And then if we went with this 6500, you're looking at 83.1. The 7700K was actually a little bit below, it's 78.7. So there's a few frames per second in it. Now this is just something that I'm stressing to you now, and we'll talk about it more later on. You've got the other results in there as well. The 1400 doesn't particularly bode epically in its stock form at this point, because at this point you are looking with Rise of the Tomb Raider in some of them. We'll go for the 6500. There's about 8 frames in it. Oh, eight frames. Okay, just 8 frames. And the other thing that we do need to keep in mind as well is we run these all at 1080, because with 1080 they do rely on the CPU a little bit more, because the frames per second gets that little bit higher. So if you were to be running these, and we run with a 980, not because NVIDIA have asked us to, but just because we've been running 980s for every single one of these tests. So it does mean that we've got a lot of results, and we've got a lot of comparison. So if you're thinking about getting something around this kind of performance output, if you were running 1080, these are going to be roughly the results that you're going to get. If you turn it up to 1440, the gaps actually narrow, because it becomes more of a CPU, more of a GPU test then, rather than it being, CPU, orientated. The 1080 point, basically the best way I can put it, at 1080, if you use the same graphics card throughout, then the difference between the results does come down to CPU and clock speed and stuff. As you go up into 1440 and 4K, it becomes less of an issue, and it becomes more GPU based, and the differences between each of the game results get so much smaller. So at this point, it actually gives us something to talk about. So anyway, we're going to save the game chit chat for later, because I have got a lot of things that I'm probably going to say some stuff that you're going to be like, wow, that's brave, and then there's going to be some other stuff that you're going to be like, did he just say that? Anyway, so gaming. There's a range for you there. You can take what you want to take from it. But one of the things I can say straight away is, really in these graphs, it comes down to clock speed mainly. X265 benchmark. To be honest with you, with the X265 benchmark, it's about encoding. And it's something that we've rolled out into the CPU reviews since Ryzen, but we did test a few Intel CPUs and put them in there as well. Now it's unsurprising, we didn't test any of the mega high Intel ones, we kind of kept it around roughly the same price point. So to be fair, it's unsurprising that the AMD ones do really well. But the thing to kind of keep in mind here is when you look down at some of the old AMD 8 cores, which we retested for the Ryzen 7 reviews, you can see quite how good these new processors have got. So if you were to compare the Ryzen 5 1400 at 13.97 versus a stock clocked 8320E at 10.02, there was one there that had 8 proper cores, and it was performing a lot less than this one that's got 4 cores and then hyper-threading. So that goes to show you how much the Ryzen architecture has moved forward. Now we can actually compare basically 4 cores with 4 kind of imaginary cores versus a proper 8-core one from the previous generation, and it outdoes it by 30-odd%. So that's pretty epic with that one. So with the CPU power draw, essentially we just load the CPU up, absolutely max it out. The same, we actually do this test at the same time we're doing our heat tests. So it's all CPU based, and this is the power that it was pulling from the wall. All of the CPUs in this graph have been tested in the exact same way, so they're all directly comparable. And like I said, this is the entire system, not just what the CPU is drawing, because the whole system is kind of on at the same time. So it's a really good way to be able to see between the lot of them. And when you consider that you've got let's face it, the 1400 is kind of down at the bottom with 121 watts, yet the old 8 cores are up near the top with like around 300 watts, and yet the one at the bottom, the 1400, can now outperform the ones at the top that were drawing almost twice the power or over twice the power. Again, shows you quite how far they've kind of come on here. Now when we move on, we go on to Cinebench. Now Cinebench again is a 3D rendering tool, but it's always a good way to kind of be able for us to pick between the performance of the CPUs themselves. And the thing here to keep in mind is we're looking at the CPU specific results as well, which are the big ones on the right hand side. That's the ones that we've focused the results on. And you can see the 1600X there. They're actually kind of where you would expect them. I think this graph is actually pretty good because there's some of the old AMD ones in the middle, but it's about CPU grunt, and this is one of the benchmarks that actually likes cores and threads. You can do quite well with some overclocking and higher in the clock speeds and that sort of thing, but cores and threads this one does like, whereas the next one it doesn't. This is single threaded, so this is just using one core on the processor and then running the same benchmark again. So we're back to the point where you've got Intels at the top because their actual single core performance has always been really good. But when you think about it, I mean, you've got the 7700K, that would have been running at 4.5 gigahertz anyway. So the AMD ones are kind of, the stock ones are kind of in the middle, and then the overclocked ones are in the middle, but you know, a little bit higher. To me, it does make perfect sense. Single threaded stuff can make a lot of difference with most programs is the best way I can put it, because not everything is aimed as being multi-threaded. Okay, so I know it's been a lot of chatting and I'm sorry, but it's the only way that I can get my thoughts out, and it is a bit of a brain fart because I don't script and I do just talk to you, but that's basically because, you know, I prefer it to do it in an honest way rather than trying to do it in a specific way. And let's face it, when I'm reading out of like an auto cue or notes and stuff, it never does well. I only ever really this is my version of notes. And, you know, I keep little things and bits and bobs, and then I've got some temperatures over here and voltages, and it's just little things to spring my mind. Anyway, so we're going to talk about awards straight away, and then we're going to go into expanding on me trying to help you decide which way you kind of need to swing with what you need to buy, really. And that might be something that it's either going to come out and go right, or I'm going to watch it back tomorrow and I'm not going to like it. So it's a bit of a risky one for me. Anyway, the 1400 vanilla, it didn't overclock as well. The memory didn't go as high. This was a brilliant, it was actually this box. It's just because that's a smaller one. This was actually a brilliant one for me to play, because what we had thought was that all of the CPUs were essentially the exact same thing and they just turned bits off and there was no kind of speed binning or anything like that going on. What the 1400 did confirm to us that there is at least some speed binning going on, because that was clearly silicon that they'd found that wasn't good enough. Whether that was from the outside of the silicon wafer or something, you know, we will never know short of us getting hold of an engineer from AMD. But what it did do is we saw that the overclock was down. It had a little bit less L3 cache, but also the memory wouldn't go as high. So from that, I mean, you could say that it might change with BIOS, but I don't think so. I think that that's why it's got such a low clock speed. That's why it's been binned as a 1400. There's a little bit less headroom in the top. It's not going to perform as well. But the thing that was really, really interesting, and this was the reason why I'm so glad I got to play with the 1400, is it then did make the 1500X seem really good value for £20 more. Now, let's not forget, I mean, you could say, oh, he's just telling us to buy the more expensive one. Talk about Ryzen 7. I don't think there's any point in buying anything above the 1700, because they all seem to overclock the same, they all perform the same, and especially if you do overclock, you don't need to go and buy the X's, or you certainly don't with anything that I've seen been going on at the moment. So for me to say that the 1500X is better value than the 1400, you really do need to stand up or sit up and listen to me saying that, because it got 3200 megahertz memory, so that's up from 2933. We went from 3.8 gigahertz, which we got with the 1400, that went up to 4 gigahertz. So the tweakability is there straight away. But then the other thing to think about is out the box, even if you don't touch it, your base clock is 3.5 rather than 3.2, and your boost speed is 3.7 rather than 3.4. And you get all of those extra nusses for 20 quid. It does come with a cooler as well if you want it, which was the big one that I showed you. So you do get a lot for £20. So really the only, I mean, I like this one. I would go for this one. I would go 1500X rather than 1400X. And really the only reason to go for the 1400X is if you are super tight on your budget. But one of the things I would say is, with all due respect, if you order a pizza from Domino's, it is £10. You go out for a few pints with your mates, by the time you know you've bought a couple of rounds and stuff, you're going to at least spend £20 every time. How many times have you bought stuff like a t-shirt or something and it's just popped up on Facebook and you're like, oh, it's amazing, and you've just spent and bought it for, you know, no reason whatsoever? Really, if you can save yourself £20 somewhere that month, I would say to go with the 1500X over the 1400. The 1400 really is like, if you really have to count every single penny. The 1400 is a little bit easier to cool, so you can get away with it, you know, with one of these, or you can, you know, even some of the coolers on the market that are like 20 or 30 quid will do you fairly well. Just remember that if you're going to do that, set a manual fan profile, because a lot of the motherboards are still being a bit spastic about stuff at the moment. If you get yourself a nice linear fan curve going on, it will save it going woo in the background when you're doing stuff, or, you know, like being on Facebook and all that sort of thing. 1600X. You bring the 6 core and the 12 threads in. Really what that does, and you pay £60 to go from the 1500X to the 1600X. You do get a higher boost clock. It goes up to 4 gigahertz. That did kind of help it in some of the benchmarks as well. One of the things that you do need to remember is when you're talking about boost is it's not all of the cores. They have a weird thing where it's like 1 core will do this, 2 cores will do that, all cores will do this. So you do need to kind of keep those kind of aspects in your mind. I have asked AMD if I can have a full breakdown of, for argument's sake, all of the Ryzen CPUs and 1 core boost, 2 core boost, you know, all core boost, so I could put a graphic up for you. I don't know whether I'm going to get that. If it ends up being in the video, you know I got one, or I ended up making it myself because I got the info. But anyway, so the 1600X. Now, £250, that kind of then puts it around the sort of price point, around the 7600K. But we are getting to the point then of talking about, well, that's 4 cores vanilla versus 6 cores and 12 threads, and things do start to get a bit weighted. And we also end up getting to the point of then, you know, do we weight things in AMD's favour this way, or is it just a fact of, well, we should think about price this way? And there's lots of stuff and, you know, things to consider. So, right, this is the hard top. Oh, we've not talked about awards. The 1400, we would give the OC3D approved award, but you do need to consider about how you are going to be using it. When we say approved, is yes, it's a good processor for £170. It's going to do you fairly well. We're going to talk about, you know, which might be the right one for you in a minute, but it does do fairly well. It's definitely worth consideration. It's a great processor for the money, and it could be a great way for you to get on the Ryzen bandwagon, because let's face it, there is, and there are going to be a lot of people that are going to want to help you and help you get the best from it. But also with the 1400s, it could be a good place to jump on and then upgrade later. So we give that the approved award. The 1500X though, for that extra £20, the extra base that you get from it, you know, the actual base clocks, and then the little bit better memory ability, a little bit better overclocking ability, that for me, out of the three, is the one. And I would say I'm going to give that the OC3D Gamer's Choice, because I think if you're looking to build an AMD system and you're looking at building it for gaming, listen to my words carefully. If you're looking to be building a Ryzen system and you're looking to be doing it for gaming, then that would be the one that I would go for, because then you have a hell of a saving over something that you might have got with the Intel for the same sort of money. But again, we're going to talk about bits and bobs in a minute, so don't take that as something to cause an argument now, because we're going to talk about it again in a bit. With the 1600X, what we would then, you do get quite a bit of performance for 250 quid, to be fair, because of all those extra cores. But with the 1600X, you are blurring the lines then from moving away from the sensible price of the 1500X. So 1600X, we would still say that it does quite well, but we would drop that back to an OC3D approved award again, because again, it then start blurring the lines and maybe what you might be wanting to use it for, which is what we're going to talk to you about in a minute. So gaming choice for the 1500X, well, that's the one that we would pick. That would be the one we would use our own money for if we were going to get it. 1600X, you do end up, you've got more grunt there, but it doesn't necessarily end up blowing the doors off of any massive, you know, gaming differences. It's all about CPU grunt then. So, right, and I have to kind of, you know, get my thoughts in order for this one. And that is, where do you go? Because there has been a lot of people talking about, oh, if it's gaming, you just go Intel. And to be honest with you, if you are just talking, absolutely just talking about gaming, nothing else, it is hard to ignore the fact that the Intel do lead so hard in the graphs. But there are arguments both sides. Now you've got the AMD argument, or the AMD fanboy argument is what I should say, and that is stuff's not been optimized yet. And that is fair. Stuff hasn't been optimized yet. They did optimize Warhammer, and they were saying 10 to 15% increase across the board with a Ryzen processor. Didn't matter what graphics card that you were using, because the game had been better optimized to use those cores. Because the thing that you need to remember is you've kind of got 4 cores, and then you've got this weird thing called the Infinity Fabric between, which I don't know why I always end up thinking about Aladdin. Yeah, I don't know, I've got issues. But so you do need to remember to get them working properly. Now, to be honest with you, the reason why I think stuff is getting optimized is I do think this is kind of a live kind of beta test. I do think stuff is being evolved with you lot all being the beta testers. Now, I am still very much of the opinion, and I don't mind saying this out loud, and it is probably going to cause a lot of grief, I do think AMD should have probably waited 6 or 8 weeks to have released Ryzen, to at least got the motherboard stuff sorted out, and a few more of the BIOS implementations done, because the last little bit of Ryzen was done so quick. Because the motherboard manufacturers, when they got the early samples of Ryzen, so the early Ryzen stuff, like the really early engineering samples, they were a bit poo. And all of the motherboard manufacturers didn't think it was going to be any good, so they didn't really bother with it too much. And then the actual, like the next round of engineering samples come out, which were basically retail samples, early retail samples, while they were starting to get the numbers together to get them out around worldwide. They come out and they were actually remarkably better. And it was at that point that they started running around like headless chickens trying to get stuff sorted out. But the motherboard vendors really only had about a month with the the release sort of code for the BIOS and stuff to get stuff done. So there wasn't enough time to have done it. So I think it was 2 weeks. So I do think that AMD would have done really well postponing it a little bit and then having a lot less of these ongoing problems. The only thing that's done them a favour is there's not really been any samples around for people to moan about. So that's the other thing, is when the actual kind of main wave of stock starts to land, they do kind of need to have a lot of this stuff sorted out, because otherwise the amount of RMAs just from people not understanding why stuff's not working or not doing what they're used to on their old i3 or old i5 system isn't working the same. So that, you know, I think they should have waited a little bit. But anyway, so talking about gaming. So yes, gaming, it's hard to argue. Now the problem is like I said to you earlier on, is it's hard to argue between the price of an i5 6500 and a 7700K if you're just gaming. Because if you're just gaming, they perform basically the same within a couple of frames per second of each other. So then you get to the point where you're like, well, why would I bother with a 7700K? And to be honest with you, I wouldn't. But then you do need to think about overclocking and stuff that you can do later on, and memory sort of stuff, because if you end up getting the i5 and then you get one of the lower end boards, you might have lower memory, you know, lower spec stuff on the boards. There is a better kind of range of options with these, because like the B350 does still support overclocking. All of the 5 and 7s do support overclocking. They've all got, they're not capped with memory, locked in by the boards and the BIOS either, as we've seen. I mean, the baby 1400, we got to nearly 3000 megahertz memory. It's the closest divider to 3000. And 3.8 gigahertz up from 3.2. So there is, you know, room to kind of play around and stuff. But the thing that AMD bring to the table is a little bit more multitasking, because yes, you do get the quad core, which is some of the i5s and the 7600K, and it really depends on price. But with these, you do get that hyper threading going on, and it really depends what you're going to be doing, because if you are going to be, I don't know, let's say transcoding films so that you can put them on Plex or something, or rendering, photo editing, music editing, doing CPU bound tasks, then that's when the AMD stuff does start to make sense. If you're thinking about sort of like CPU bound titles in games, they do still seem to kind of like clock speed. And then, you know, the whole gaming sort of thing does kind of lean back to the Intel side of things. So if you're absolutely hell-bent on games, then really the thing to do is to think about price. Because if you're just thinking about price, you need to think to yourself, what sort of graphics card do I want? What sort of, you know, motherboard, memory, you know, am I going to be playing at 1080? Am I going to be playing a little higher at maybe 1440p? That's really where you want to be thinking. And that's just if you're going to be playing a game, or playing a game, depending on what games that you play. So playing a game, or as I do it, playing a game with your mates, and maybe linking up with them online, not streaming. But if you're thinking about streaming, so you're playing a game then, and you've also got a program going on in the background, trying to grab all that stuff and then send it up online in a way that all the people on Twitch or whatever you're streaming to, in a, you know, sort of a format that they can use as well. So there's lots more stuff going on, and that's really when these do start to make sense. If you are not, you know, hell-bent on gaming, and you kind of like to do, like I said, photo editing, layering up stacks, I don't know, maybe you're taking pictures of stars in the Milky Way and you've got to layer up all these photos and stuff, that can take chuffing hours. Now if you're doing a bit of that and you like to do a bit of gaming as well, again, for the money, these do seem to make a lot of sense. In that, you know, like the 4-core, hyper-threading, you know, 6-core, depending on your budget, it's all kind of like that. But then you also need to remember that you can overclock as well, and you can do that on cheap boards. I mean, you can get the B350 boards for about 80 quid. And then when you get up to the really kind of high-end sort of stuff, where you're talking about 8 cores and all those sort of threads and stuff, that is the point where the price differential between AMD and Intel opens up so much. If you need cores and you're on a budget, you would have to search long and hard to find a second-hand Intel processor for the right sort of money to make you not want to go for one of these. So it is a bit of a, you know, because I have seen people just going, oh no, you must buy Intel. And it's like, well, you know, not really. And I'm not being, you know, AMD, I wish I did have a big fat wad of notes in my back pocket, but I don't. I'm just trying to be that friend to you that you go to ask for advice. And the thing is there isn't a simple AMD or Intel answer for everyone. You really do need to look at what you want from it and then decide from there on out. Some of the Ryzen stuff though, the factor that really does come in is you do get a lot of cores and a lot of threads and a lot of CPU grunt for the money, and it 9 times out of 10 when it's CPU bound stuff for the same money on Intel, they can't really touch you. The only thing where they are winning at the moment is that extra clock speed, kind of at the top end. And this is the deciding factor, that extra clock speed at the top end with the dodgy hand going like this. Oh yes, I'm the Queen. Yeah, that clock speed difference. What did it really end up coming down to? So most 8, maybe 10 frames per second. And that would have been at the kind of level with the 980. We were already well above 60 frames per second anyway. And the thing to remember with the results in my graphs is that they are average scores as well. So that's your average frames per second that you've got there. So with, for argument's sake, the 1500X, it's about 4 frames per second difference. And some of those 4 frames per second difference, again, they were up in that top 3. You can see you had the i5 6500 normal, 7600K, which would have been running at 3.6 gigahertz. Then you had, 3.8 gigahertz, turboing up to 4. And then you had the 7700, which was then going from 4 up to, what was it, 4.5, I think it used to boost up to. So 4 or 5 frames per second difference. Quite a bit more money though, wasn't it, when you think about it? So when you do look at those graphs, and we do think about gaming, if it is just gaming that you want to do, and those 4 frames per second difference going to make the difference to you, then fair enough, you've got it there. You've seen the results, you know, maybe you want to go and get one of those. That's totally up to you. But then the other thing to think about is add the price of the rig up. Add the price of the rig up for one of these. And also, I mean, we can't sell it on the fact that stuff is going to evolve and stuff, Ryzen is going to get better. Because one of the things that you do need to realise is Warhammer, that was a heavily AMD backed game. So Warhammer had a reason to optimise the game for Ryzen. And that was because, let's face it, they were supported by AMD. There would have been some financial kind of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but they would have been looked after for doing it. Now you do need to think that some of the big developers are going to need AMD to chuck some money at them to get them done, because it takes time. Time means money. There are wages to pay to do it. So it's not like, oh, AMD are buying developers. No, AMD are buying you better frames per second. So there's no bad way to put it, unless you're an Intel fanboy, and then you're just getting bitchy that your game, it was always kind of heavily Intel weighted for your game. But now AMD have actually woken up and they wanted a bit of optimizations as well. You're just starting to sound like a jealous kid then. So there is no bitching that you can do about, oh, AMD spent some money and got stuff optimized. It's just normal. Intel have been throwing money about like it was water for such a long time. So you really can't moan there. So the point I'm trying to make is when it does come to game optimization, the first few to break the seal, go out alone, be brave, go out and optimize for Ryzen. Yes, AMD are going to have to drive that forward. But the point is that if enough people invest into Ryzen, then the other game developers will then feel the pressure from everyone moaning about it, and that's when they start rolling out. But you can't buy that hoping that your favourite game is going to get done, because the other thing to think about is we're thinking about games now. What about the ones coming up? What about the ones next year? We've got to think broadly about this. But anyway, so I think they've done, to be honest with you, for when you consider the budget aspect and the actual performance difference, it's actually not really that, big. When you're talking about, 76 to 80 frames per second, 4-6 frames per second difference in some of the results. But the price difference between them, I don't particularly think it's that bad. So I'm not saying that, essentially the best way to put it is if they had these processors and we were able to overclock them to 4.3, 4.4, 4.5 gigahertz, there would be a massive difference in the graphs. Kind of upsets me that they didn't, but considering this is the first time out with the new Ryzen architecture and the you know, the way they've been putting them together and everything. It'd be nice to see what's going to happen with the if they do like a refresh and a refinement of the technology. But anyway, even I'm starting to lose my train of thought now, so I apologise for taking so much of your time. But there is no clear answer for AMD or Intel. It doesn't even matter whether you want games. AMD are still going to be slightly behind in games. That's just the way it is. But it isn't much. Not in the grand scheme of things. Ignore that Gears of War one, because that is literally just looking at CPU grunt, and it loves clock speed. I don't know why I did that. I was just thinking about focusing on stuff. It just loves clock speed. So really it comes down to those the graphs in the middle, you know, those numbers in the middle, and the difference between those ones, there wasn't really a great deal to it, if I'm honest. But you do need to, if we are talking about gaming, overclocking your processor does make a lot of difference, and it can, you owe it to yourself to do that. So you are going to need to follow guides and stuff, but you are going to need some decent cooling if you don't want to go deaf, and you are going to need a relatively good motherboard as well if you want it to, you know, last for quite a while. And it does seem that slightly quicker memory can help. Now, I know there's been a lot of chat about 3600 megahertz and stuff, but it is actually quite difficult to get 3600 running, and you need a clock speed generator added onto the board, because the highest that you can get without the clock speed generator on any of the boards is 3200 megahertz, and that's an AMD cap. So to be honest with you, I wouldn't really go above 3200 megahertz. It can be hard enough to get 32 running, let alone trying to go above it. That's just one for people that, you know, have got a lot of time and a lot of experience to play around with it. But anyway, you've got a lot of results there. You've had a lot of information. I'm sorry that it was all me talking, but it's the only way I can get it out of my brain in a way that you can understand. And yes, I know that a lot of the time you do need to sit there and kind of bore yourself through it and take a few notes and stuff. But really, the best way that I would normally do this is we would have like me stood on a stage, and you'd all be downstairs or like below, and there was a bar, and we'd all had beers, and we just sit and chat, because I think that's the best way to do it. That's the way I try and do this. It's kind of virtual chatting. It's just a shame I haven't got a beer. Have you got a beer? People in the comments got a beer? Let's go and have a look. Anyway, I got water. Maybe I need to go and have a beer now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. One of the things I did forget to say, and I'm going to get in trouble because it's right at the end, but the AM4 cooler support is getting a lot better now. Manufacturers are bringing out special brackets and stuff for the coolers. This one that we tested recently was the Master Air Pro 4. Now we do normally, we are testing on Intel because we have been for such a long time. You know, we've not really had a reason to test on Ryzen, and if we did introduce Ryzen, we'd still have to do Intel because of the graphs, and then it just makes things an absolute pain in the rear bum. But people like Cooler Master, I've got such an itchy nose. People like Cooler Master are starting to roll out the proper AM4 kits now. They've got water-cooled versions, like AIOs that they've got with proper AM4 support. Because obviously you do need the AM4 support, because the mounts are slightly different from AM3, and there's only one board on the market that supports AM3 Plus and AM4 mounts, and that's this one, and it's hella expensive. But the Master Air Pro 4, it was actually quite good. We've not tested it across all of the CPUs yet, because to be honest with you, we've not had enough time, and like I said, the sun came out at the weekend. So, but we have got like a roundup and stuff planned where we're going to be trying to get this in there as well. So keep your eye out. The only reason why I'm kind of showing you the Cooler Master one is because they have released their AM4 bracket. One of the things that you will see is Corsair and NZXT finally have theirs out as well. There's been a lot of people losing their mind that the Corsair bracket is the same as the NZXT one. That might be because they're both made by Asetek. So the bracket is made by one person and it just magically fits both. So the other hint that we've got here is, if you haven't got your AM4 bracket for one of your older coolers yet, the Corsair and the NZXT ones are exactly the same. So if you can get one of them, then they'll fit. So as long as you've got an Asetek based AIO, they're normally the ones when you flip it round, they've got the round thing with almost like a clock around the outside. You can see all the divots around the outside. Those ones, yeah, they're interchangeable. That's handy, innit? Anyway, so Yeah, maybe I should have said that at the beginning. It might have been better rather than right at the end when 99% of the people have tuned out. So yes, this has been Tiny Tom Logan with a monstrous review, and I do really need to go now because my camera battery has just gone red. So congratulations if you got to the end. I hope some of this was actually worthwhile for some of you guys. I know it's been a lot of information to take in. I know you might need to watch it twice. God, you must need a life. Anyway, this has been Tiny Tom Logan with your AMD Ryzen 5 1400, 1500X and 1600X CPU review out.